This is 14th century West Africa. Beneath a blazing Sahel sun, a caravan wins its way across the vast expanse of the Sahara. Camels groan under the weight of gold, pure, shimmering gold destined for cities whose names stir awe across continents: Timbuktu, Gao, Niani. Somewhere within this golden tide rides a figure cloaked in both legend and authority: Mansa Musa, Emperor of Mali, the richest man to ever walk the earth. But let's imagine something different this time. Imagine if, instead of gold alone, the saddle pouches contained something far more volatile: schematics of rotary cannons, blueprints of armored personnel carriers, encrypted communications, and maps etched with satellite precision. What if the Empire of Mali, with its sprawling trade networks, monumental wealth, and far-reaching influence, had developed or somehow acquired modern weaponry? The sands of West Africa would have burned differently. This isn't just a speculative game of what if. It's a thought experiment that pulls at the threads of history and asks, what happens when the most powerful empire in medieval Africa possesses the technological capabilities of a 21st century superpower? Imagine the year is 1324. Instead of merely arriving in Cairo with 60,000 attendants and enough gold to crash local economies, Mansa Musa arrives in a convoy protected by high-speed armored transports and aerial drones surveilling his route. The Egyptian Sultan's court, already overwhelmed by Musa's legendary wealth, now stares down blinking steel beasts, humming with power, silent threats cloaked in technological superiority. Diplomacy changes forever. News spreads like wildfire through trans-Saharan routes. In Tunis, Tripoli, Fez, whispers of a black empire with weapons that defy reason ripple through the courts. Some scoff, others panic. No one ignores it. But how would this power shift actually unfold? To understand this, we must first remember, Mali wasn't just rich, it was organized. It had a bureaucratic system that could rival those in Europe. It had real cities with libraries, scholars, astronomers, and theologians. Timbuktu was not a backwater. It was a beacon. Add to that modern surveillance tech, encrypted communications, and smart logistical systems. And suddenly, you don't just have an African empire with modern weapons, you have an African superstate. One of the first major impacts would have been felt within Mali itself. Traditional resistance from conquered vassal states like the Tuareg or the Mossi would have been crushed with brutal efficiency. The empire's borders, once fluid and vulnerable, would harden like iron. In Gao, rebellions would not smolder for long. One precision drone strike or a column of tanks rolling across the savannah would silence them. Fear becomes a tool. Subjugation becomes swift. Mali doesn't just dominate trade, it dominates psychology. And the psychological warfare wouldn't stop at the Sahel. Across the Mediterranean, European powers are just beginning to emerge from their feudal haze. England is embroiled in dynastic squabbles. France is testing the waters of centralization. Spain hasn't even finished the Reconquista. Meanwhile, an empire in the African interior is displaying firepower that even the Mongols couldn't comprehend. Western Europe would panic. Their myth of superiority, unshaken for centuries, would crack. Trade missions turn into espionage. Scholars from Oxford and Avignon begin scrambling to learn Soninka and Mandinka. Jesuits write letters to Rome begging for guidance on this black force of heaven. But it doesn't stop with Europe. The Islamic world, already familiar with Mali's wealth, now sees its military. The Mamluks, fierce and proud, convene urgent councils. The Ottomans, still ascending, rework their priorities. Morocco reconsiders its ambitions. The Hajj becomes a demonstration of power. When Musa arrives in Mecca now, he's not just a pious king. He's a commander whose troops are stationed in controlled perimeters, drones mapping the Hijaz, and communication satellites orbiting above. Islam, while always a core part of Mali's identity, now has a power center on par with Baghdad or Cairo, but in the West. All of this would reconfigure geopolitics. We've often been told a version of African history where the continent reacts to global powers, never leads them. But with modern weaponry and technological infrastructure, Mali wouldn't just react, it would dictate. It would shape diplomatic boundaries, coin trade agreements, and demand respect. Instead of being colonized, it may become the one doing the colonizing. And yet, power breeds tension. What happens when other African empires like Songhai or Benin see Mali's rise? Do they submit or do they resist? This is where things start to fracture. The Islamic world would scramble to understand what kind of divine favor or sorcery had been bestowed upon this black African empire. Rumors would swirl in Cairo's streets and Baghdad's halls, some claiming Musa had struck a covenant with jinns, others whispering of secret knowledge unearthed in the mines of Bambouk or the libraries of Timbuktu. Scholars would be dispatched to study this Malian science, while rival rulers would send spies cloaked as pilgrims. In Europe, the Papal States would receive fragmented reports of a mighty African empire wielding fire-spewing weapons and metal beasts that moved without horses. The Vatican would debate whether this was the kingdom of Prester John finally discovered or a new threat to Christendom itself. Portugal, Spain, and Genoa, all hungry for gold and new trade, would reconsider their naval ambitions, not as explorers but as anxious observers, watching West Africa with wary eyes. Mali's technological edge would mean the age of exploration might never begin the way it did. Perhaps Africa would send envoys and fleets northward instead, docking in Lisbon before the Portuguese ever rounded the Cape. Back in Mali, the internal dynamics would be just as altered. With such modern military might, the threat from vassal states like Songhai or Tikrur would be minimal. But peace bought with firepower brings its own challenges. Would the empire rely too heavily on the illusion of invincibility? Would dissent simmer beneath the surface, hidden but festering? Imagine a dissident Fulani scholar writing treatises in coded language, critiquing the empire's newfound obsession with war machines and warning that spiritual decay follows technological arrogance. And what of trade? With the empire secure, gold routes would flourish, but so would expectations. Mali could impose taxes with impunity. Caravan raiders would be wiped out by drone surveillance and ambush-resistant transports. Timbuktu would become not just a hub of Islamic learning, but the Silicon Valley of the medieval world. Scholars and inventors laboring under oil lamps beside machine parts and circuit diagrams. The Sankore University would buzz not only with theological debate, but with discussions on ballistics, metallurgy, and energy transfer. Imagine the reverberations. The trans-Saharan trade routes would widen into bulletproof corridors. Horses might fall out of favor as diesel-fueled convoys become the norm. The architecture would evolve. Less mud brick, more steel frames and armored towers. Mali's cities would glisten with modernity amidst the red dust of tradition. Minarets would stand beside radio towers, and the call to prayer might echo from both muezzins and AI-powered speakers. But here's where the story bends into tension. Power attracts enemies. Other African kingdoms, Benin, Ife, Congo, would either be drawn into alliances or crushed under the weight of Mali's superiority. Colonialism might never arrive in the way we know it, but conquest doesn't require Europeans. It only requires a gap in power. Would Mali, now militarized, become a colonizer of its own continent? The rivers that once carried traders would now carry patrol boats. The same Sahara that separated tribes would be mapped by satellite and patrolled by Mali's desert division. Troops in camouflage, moving in armored vehicles where camels once trod. The age-old rhythms of griots singing ancestral glories by firelight might compete with state broadcasts, propaganda, and military anthems blaring from loudspeakers. What does it mean when tradition is guarded not by spirit, but by circuitry? When elders' wisdom must compete with data, and rituals must adapt to the glow of digital screens. Ushering in a technological Mali wouldn't just shift the geopolitics, it would rewire the soul of the empire. People whose strength once came from oral history, community, and Islamic scholarship might find themselves governed by efficiency algorithms, biometric IDs, and drones that don't sleep. Power would become both expansive and precise. Imagine a rebel uprising in Gao crushed before it began because intelligence intercepted texts, heat signatures, or drone footage showed a pattern of clandestine meetings. And yet, even this imperial control wouldn't be limitless. The very tools that hold power also decentralize it. What happens when knowledge is no longer passed down from elder to student, but uploaded, copied, and spread without control? What if rogue engineers or scholars turned their knowledge against the state, building rival weapons or launching ideological warfare through pamphlets and radio broadcasts? Every golden age has its shadow. Mali, now a steel-backed leviathan, might face internal fissures it can't bomb into silence. The very wealth and safety it created would give rise to new ambitions. younger generals dreaming of coups, clerics warning of moral collapse, traders frustrated by central oversight. And somewhere in the marketplaces of Timbuktu or the salt mines of Tagaza, someone would whisper, "The ancestors wouldn't have wanted this." Foreign powers, too, would shift. If Europe failed to dominate Africa through colonization, it might choose something more subtle: economic manipulation, espionage, proxy wars. Would France, unable to conquer, try to buy loyalty? Would Britain send agents disguised as missionaries to steal Mali's blueprints? The balance of power globally would be shaken. Mali could forge its own alliances, perhaps with the Ottomans or the Chinese Empire, creating a tripolar world where Africa leads, not follows. But the empire, no matter how benevolent, comes at a cost. Imagine the moral debates in Timbuktu's libraries, whether technological advancement without spiritual grounding leads to hubris. Sundiata's epics would be rewritten with cautionary tones. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage might now be retold not as a spiritual journey, but as a display of economic domination. Gold-laced convoys protected by aerial drones and tanks guarding the Kaaba's approach. At the heart of it all remains a haunting question. Can tradition and technology truly coexist without one consuming the other? Now shift to the present. In this world, there is no Berlin Conference, no scramble for Africa. Mali leads a Pan-African bloc that rivals the West in GDP, education, and innovation. It launches its own space program, tracing the stars once studied in Sankore. Its universities collaborate with China and Brazil. Its citizens speak Mandinka, Arabic, and English, code in Java, and quote Sufi poets. And what about conflict? The world of today teeters on tension. The Iran-Israel conflict simmers. The U.S. balances diplomacy and defense. Into this, Mali acts as a stabilizing force. Its diplomats mediate peace talks. Its humanitarian fleets offer aid. Its AI diplomacy systems predict war hotspots and offer resolutions. The empire has evolved not just technologically, but morally. Or has it? Because even in this enlightened version, questions remain. Does Mali suppress dissent with surveillance? Do its borderlands suffer under the weight of centralized power? Are its provinces truly free, or just differently controlled? Eventually, all empires face entropy. The question isn't whether Mali would collapse, but how. Would it fracture under its own complexity? Would outlying regions seek independence? Would a charismatic warlord, disillusioned with AI governance, rally soldiers under the banner of Old Mali? Or would it transition, peacefully, into a networked commonwealth, where shared values replace centralized rule? So the next time you hear of Timbuktu, don't just think of lost manuscripts or forgotten sands. Think of a future that could have been. A golden age wrapped in silicon. A Sahel where satellites orbit over stories, where griots speak into microphones, and where Africa didn't wait to be discovered. It launched forward first.